The crystal chandeliers of the Eco Hotel Grand Ballroom had never sparkled so brightly, yet the light felt cold as ice. 400 of Lagos's wealthiest guests stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended mid-air, as Rachel Carter's quiet voice cut through the celebration like a knife through silk. Her mother-in-law, Victoria Carter, stood at the center of the room holding a microphone, her expensive gown suddenly feeling like a costume. The older woman's face had gone completely pale, her carefully painted smile crumbling into something raw and broken. Just seconds ago, she had been mocking Rachel in front of everyone, delivering cruel jokes about her daughter-in-law's simple taste and low status. Beside Rachel stood James Wilson, a man in an elegant tuxedo whose weathered hands told a different story. 3 weeks ago, those same hands had counted out his last 1,800 naira to save a dying pregnant woman collapsed on the street. That dying woman had been Rachel. What would happen when Rachel revealed the truth that would destroy everything Victoria had built? 6 months earlier, James Wilson had been counting the same coins for 3 minutes outside the financial district in Victoria Island, Lagos. His fingers, cracked from weeks of November cold and hunger, trembled as they sorted the bills and coins. 1,863 naira. That was everything he owned in the world. James had lost his engineering job 6 months ago when his company cut costs. Then he lost his apartment. Then he lost his belief that hard work and good character mattered in this world. Now he survived by begging outside expensive buildings and searching through restaurant bins for food. The November morning had started like every other morning, cold, hopeless, and hungry. But it was ending in a way James never expected. The pregnant woman collapsed so suddenly that James thought she'd been shot. Her body crumpled against the marble wall of the luxury apartment building on Victoria Island. Blood stained her expensive blue maternity dress. James had been walking past because the restaurants in that area left better food in their bins. When he heard her body hit the ground, something in his chest tightened. He was watching someone's life change forever, just like his own life had changed the day he lost everything. The building's doorman noticed her collapse. He took 2 steps toward her, then decided helping was someone else's job and went back inside to his air-conditioned lobby. James made his decision in seconds. His feet carried him across the sidewalk while his brain listed all the reasons this was a terrible idea. He had only 1,800 naira. He had no phone to call for help. He had no ID that would make any hospital take him seriously. His mother had always told him that poverty made you invisible to the rich until they needed someone to blame. The woman's eyes opened when James knelt beside her. Those eyes stared at his face with terrible intensity, as if memorizing every detail before she died. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the traffic. But he understood. She was asking for help the same way he'd asked dozens of people who walked past his cardboard sign. He had a choice. He could walk past a dying pregnant woman to keep his last money. Or he could give everything to a stranger. What choice would James make? "I'm getting you help," James said, his voice rough from days of not speaking to anyone. "Just hold on." He scooped up his 1,800 naira, every coin, every crumpled bill, and half-carried, half-dragged the pregnant woman 3 blocks to the nearest clinic. His arms burned with effort. His empty stomach cramped with hunger. But he kept moving. The clinic receptionist almost turned them away. "Sir, this woman needs a hospital, not a clinic. We can't handle emergencies like this." James pushed all his money across the counter. His hands shook as he released the last thing standing between him and starvation. "This is all I have. But she's dying. If you turn her away, I'll make sure everyone knows this clinic lets pregnant women die on their doorstep." The receptionist stared at the crumpled bills. She stared at James's desperate face. Then she made a phone call that saved the woman's life. James waited until the doctors took her inside. Then he walked out into the Lagos heat with empty pockets and an emptier stomach, not knowing that the woman whose life he'd saved would soon turn his entire world upside down. Rachel Carter woke up 3 hours later in a private hospital room she secretly owned. Machines beeped around her, monitoring the baby who'd almost died because of the stress her husband had deliberately caused. The nurses told her about the homeless man who'd given his last kobo to save her. They described his face, his worn clothes, his cracked hands. Rachel's assistant was already searching security footage to find him. What the nurses didn't know was that Rachel Carter was not the simple, useless wife everyone believed her to be. She was the secret owner of Pinnacle Investments, a trillion naira empire she'd built over 7 years while her husband Daniel thought she did nothing all day. Daniel had kicked her out of their Victoria Island apartment that very morning, handing her 40 naira and calling it generous. He told her she contributed nothing to their marriage and needed to leave so his girlfriend Linda could move in. The apartment Daniel thought he owned? Rachel had purchased it 2 years ago when his family business was failing. She'd saved the Carter family from bankruptcy through a secret company, all while Daniel spent his evenings in hotels with Linda. Rachel's mother-in-law, Victoria Carter, had spent 7 years mocking Rachel at every company event. She called Rachel simple and stupid in front of clients and executives. She made cruel jokes about Rachel's background at fancy galas. She treated her daughter-in-law like dirt beneath her expensive shoes. What Victoria didn't know was that Rachel now owned Carter Global Enterprises, the family business Victoria used as her personal kingdom. Rachel had purchased it 3 weeks ago through hidden transactions while Victoria planned her annual gala. Rachel picked up her phone and called her lawyer, Marcus Chin. "Find the homeless man who saved me. His name is James Wilson. Bring him to me." "What are you planning?" Marcus asked carefully. Rachel touched her belly, feeling her baby kick. "Victoria's gala is in 3 weeks. I'm going to attend. I'm bringing James as my guest. And I'm going to let Victoria mock me one last time before I destroy everything she's ever built." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Rachel, are you sure about this?" "I've been sure for 7 years," Rachel said coldly. "I've built an empire in the shadows they created. Now it's time to step into the light." She hung up and stared out the window at Lagos's skyline. Somewhere in this city, Daniel was celebrating his freedom with Linda, drinking champagne in an apartment he didn't own. Victoria was planning a gala with money from a company she'd already lost. And James Wilson was probably searching through bins for food, not knowing that his 1,800 naira sacrifice was about to change his life forever. Would Rachel's plan for revenge work? Or would something go terribly wrong at the gala? 5 days later, James Wilson woke up in a hotel suite he couldn't understand. The bed was soft, too soft. The room was clean, too clean. And there were lawyers calling him Mr. Wilson with respect he hadn't heard in years. The woman he'd saved had found him sleeping in a bus station in Ikeja. She'd introduced herself as Rachel and explained nothing except that she needed him to attend an event with her in 3 weeks. "I'll provide everything you need," Rachel had said, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Clothes, food, a place to stay. Your only job is to be present and be yourself." James had agreed because he had nothing to lose. But also because something in Rachel's eyes reminded him of himself before he'd lost everything. The look of someone who'd been underestimated so completely that they'd become dangerous. Rachel's assistant, Jennifer Martinez, treated James like he mattered. She didn't look through him the way most people did. She didn't wrinkle her nose at his appearance. She simply helped him prepare for whatever Rachel was planning. "You'll need to wear a tuxedo to the gala," Jennifer explained, showing James the expensive suit hanging in the closet. "Just be yourself. That's all Mrs. Carter needs from you." Jennifer also gave James an envelope containing 50,000 naira. The note inside read, "This isn't charity. This is a down payment on a debt I owe you. The rest comes after the gala." James cried in the hotel bathroom after reading that note. Not because of the money but because someone had acknowledged that his sacrifice mattered. Someone saw him as a human being who'd done something worthy of respect. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter stood in the Victoria Island apartment with his girlfriend Linda, celebrating what he thought was his new beginning. They'd been living there for 2 weeks, drinking expensive wine and planning their future together. Linda had already started redecorating, replacing Rachel's simple furniture with pieces she considered more sophisticated. She talked about their wedding, their honeymoon in Dubai, the children they'd raise in this beautiful apartment. Daniel encouraged her spending. He had no idea the apartment belonged to Rachel. He had no idea his salary from Carter Global was about to disappear. He had no idea that everything he thought he owned had always belonged to the wife he'd thrown away like garbage. His mother, Victoria, had thrown a private celebration dinner the night Daniel moved Linda in. She'd gathered the family at a fancy restaurant in Ikoyi to toast what she called Daniel's fresh start with someone more suitable. Victoria had spent the entire dinner praising Linda. Her sophistication. Her business sense from her marketing job. Her understanding of how our world works. Every compliment was designed to emphasize everything Rachel supposedly lacked. Daniel's father, Robert Carter, had remained silent throughout the dinner. His discomfort was visible but unexpressed. Victoria made all the family decisions, and everyone else simply accepted her judgments as law. What none of them knew was that Robert had received a mysterious call 3 days ago from a lawyer representing Pinnacle Investments. The lawyer informed him that Carter Global Enterprises had been purchased in a buyout so smooth that Robert hadn't even realized his company was for sale. Robert had tried to investigate who owned Pinnacle Investments, but every search led to shell companies and offshore accounts too complex to untangle. He decided not to tell Victoria yet, not until he understood what was happening. Victoria, meanwhile, was planning her annual gala with obsessive intensity. This year's event would debut Linda as Daniel's new partner in the most public way possible. Victoria had already prepared cruel remarks about women who try to climb above their stations, in case Rachel dared to attend. She practiced her jokes in front of the mirror, timing her pauses for maximum humiliation. She imagined the moment when 400 guests would laugh at her wit while Rachel stood alone and powerless. What would happen when all of Victoria's careful plans collided with Rachel's secret power? The Eco Hotel Grand Ballroom had never looked more beautiful or more ironic. 500 guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, celebrating a company that no longer belonged to the family hosting the party. Victoria Carter stood at the center in her expensive gown, holding a microphone and surveying her kingdom with absolute satisfaction. Daniel and Linda stood near the front, his arm around her waist in a possessive gesture. Both smiled at guests who'd come to celebrate what they thought was Carter Global's continued success. None of them noticed the small changes in the room. The Pinnacle Investments logo subtly incorporated into the flower arrangements. The security personnel who answered to Rachel rather than to Victoria's event coordinator. Rachel entered through the side entrance exactly as Victoria began her welcome speech. James walked beside her in his tuxedo, transformed from invisible homeless man to distinguished gentleman, though his eyes still carried the weariness of someone who'd learned that good fortune could disappear instantly. Rachel had chosen an emerald green maternity gown that made her pregnancy impossible to ignore, a deliberate reminder of exactly what Daniel had abandoned. She'd also chosen to arrive late, wanting Victoria to be mid-speech when Rachel's presence registered. Victoria saw her first. The microphone nearly slipped from her hand before she recovered with practiced grace. "Well?" Victoria said, her voice carrying false warmth that barely concealed her venom. "How unexpected. My former daughter-in-law has decided to join us this evening, despite no longer having any connection to this company or this family." The crowd's laughter was nervous. People sensed something beneath Victoria's words but didn't understand what they were witnessing. Daniel had turned pale. His arm dropped from Linda's waist as he registered that Rachel was not only present but accompanied by a man he didn't recognize, a man looking at Rachel with protective concern. Rachel walked slowly toward the front of the room, not rushing. She let every guest get a clear look at her face and the man beside her. She let Victoria build toward whatever public humiliation she'd prepared. Victoria didn't disappoint. "I'm sure we're all curious about Rachel's guest this evening. Have you found someone new already, dear? Someone more suited to your actual station in life?" The implication hung in the air like poison. Victoria was suggesting Rachel had brought a homeless man to a society gala. Was suggesting Rachel's standards had fallen to match her low circumstances. "Actually," Rachel said, her voice quiet but somehow carrying to every corner without a microphone, "I'd like to introduce James Wilson. The man who saved my life and my baby's life 3 weeks ago when I collapsed outside the apartment where my husband had just kicked me out to move his mistress into the home I'd purchased." The room went completely silent. Every guest focused entirely on Rachel's words rather than Victoria's performance. "James gave me his last 1,800 naira, every kobo he owned, to get me medical help, not knowing who I was or whether I could ever repay him." Rachel paused, letting that sink in. "I wanted James here tonight because he represents something this room needs to remember. That character reveals itself in sacrifice, not in wealth. And that the people we dismiss as powerless sometimes possess more humanity than those who think they control everything." What devastating truth would Rachel reveal next? Victoria tried to regain control, her voice sharp with barely disguised anger. "How touching. A homeless man with 1,800 naira and a discarded wife with delusions. I'm sure you'll both be very happy together in whatever modest circumstances you." Carter Global Enterprises was purchased 3 weeks ago by Pinnacle Investments. Rachel interrupted, her voice still quiet but now carrying an edge that made several executives straighten with sudden attention. "Pinnacle Investments is a private equity firm I founded 7 years ago. I built it from nothing while my husband was with his mistress and my mother-in-law was mocking me at events exactly like this one." The devastation on Victoria's face was total. Her carefully constructed expression crumbled into something raw and disbelieving. But Rachel wasn't finished. "Every gala where you humiliated me, Victoria, I was between phone calls with heads of state and Fortune 500 CEOs. Every time Daniel handed me 40 naira and called it generous, I was signing deals worth billions. Every assumption you made about my limitations became camouflage for an empire you never thought to look for." Daniel had started shaking. His face transitioned from pale to gray as the implications hit him in waves. He'd kicked out the woman who'd saved his family. He'd mocked the wife who owned everything he'd thought was his. Linda had stepped away from him, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she realized she'd attached herself to a man who had nothing. A man whose wealth had always belonged to the wife he'd discarded. This gala was paid for with company funds, Rachel continued, looking directly at Victoria. My company's funds since I own Carter Global now. This building belongs to a real estate portfolio I purchased last year. Every executive in this room works for me, though most of them didn't know it until this moment. Rachel's voice grew colder. And the apartment Daniel moved his mistress into? I bought that 2 years ago when your family business was failing. I prevented your bankruptcy through a shell corporation because despite everything you'd done to me, I still loved your son enough to save him from the consequences of his family's incompetence. Victoria's collapse wasn't physical, but psychological. Her body remained upright while everything that had defined her identity shattered in front of 400 witnesses who'd spent years watching her cruelty and doing nothing. Daniel stumbled backward, his hands reaching for support that wasn't there. His mind raced through every moment of the past 3 weeks, realizing every celebration had been built on a foundation that had already disappeared. Linda was already moving toward the exit, her survival instincts telling her to distance herself from the wreckage before it consumed her too. But Rachel wasn't done. The cruelty she'd endured required more than just exposure. It required justice that would make the lesson impossible to forget. Daniel, the apartment you're living in belongs to me. You have 72 hours to vacate it. I'm giving you exactly what you gave me, 3 days to find somewhere else to go with nothing but the clothes you can carry. Daniel's legs gave out. He caught himself on a nearby table, knocking champagne glasses to the floor. Victoria, the properties you've used to maintain your social position are all mortgaged against Carter Global credit lines that no longer exist. Which means you're about to discover what bankruptcy feels like. Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal. And Linda, the credit cards Daniel gave you access to were connected to accounts that Pinnacle Investments controlled. Every purchase you made over the past 3 weeks was made with my money. My attorneys will file a civil lawsuit tomorrow. The room remained frozen. 400 people watching 3 lives disintegrate in real time. What would Rachel do with her victory now? The room remained silent as Rachel turned to James, her expression softening for the first time that evening. I'm offering James a position as Director of Community Investment at Pinnacle Investments, she announced. His job will be to identify and support people experiencing homelessness who demonstrate the kind of character he showed me. People who give when they have nothing. People who help when helping costs them everything. James's eyes filled with tears. His hand found Rachel's and squeezed it with gratitude that transcended words. Gratitude for being seen as fully human again after months of being treated as invisible. Victoria stumbled from the room without another word. Her reign ending not with a dramatic exit, but with a silent retreat that was somehow more devastating than any scene she could have caused. Daniel followed her, his posture that of a man who just realized he'd traded a trillion-naira empire for a mistress who was currently pretending not to know him. Linda disappeared into the crowd, her face a mask of calculation as she ran through her catastrophic options. The guests began whispering the moment the 3 of them were gone. Phone cameras captured everything for social media posts that would ensure the story spread far beyond the 400 witnesses in the ballroom. 6 months later, Rachel sat in a private hospital room overlooking Lagos, holding 3 newborn daughters. Triplets, Grace, Justice, and Mercy. Names that represented the 3 forces that had shaped her journey from dismissed wife to secret billionaire to public victor. James sat beside her hospital bed as the baby's godfather. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than romance but different from traditional family, a bond forged through mutual rescue and shared understanding of what it meant to be underestimated. Daniel had indeed become homeless within weeks of the gala, his descent mirroring James's original journey but without the character that had made James worthy of rescue. Victoria had filed for bankruptcy within a month, her properties ceased to pay hidden debts. Federal prosecutors were now investigating financial irregularities Rachel had quietly reported. Linda had tried selling her story to tabloids, only to discover Rachel's legal team had already documented every false claim she might make. James's program at Pinnacle Investments had identified and supported 247 people experiencing homelessness in its first 6 months. He ran the program with the passion of someone who'd lived the nightmare and survived it. The story had gone viral exactly as Rachel intended. The gala footage spread across social media with hashtags teaching millions of viewers the lessons Rachel had learned through suffering. That dismissing people based on circumstances was not just cruel but stupid. That abused spouses sometimes accumulated power while appearing powerless. That public mockery always found public justice. And that 1800 naira given with pure intentions could trigger consequences that reshaped entire worlds. Become, and felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years of marriage to Daniel. Peace that wasn't contingent on pretending to be less than she was. Safety that wasn't dependent on making herself invisible. Hope that her children would grow up knowing their mother had chosen justice over silence, even when silence would have been easier. James smiled at the babies and said softly, "You didn't need me to save you, Rachel. You were always powerful. I just reminded you that you weren't alone." Rachel smiled back. "And you reminded me that being powerless and being invisible aren't the same thing. We saved each other, James. And these 3 girls are going to save a whole lot more." The story ended not with revenge but with restoration. Not with destruction, but with building something better from the ruins of what had been broken. Teaching the ultimate lesson, that justice flows from character rather than wealth, and that the moral universe bends toward people who give their last kobo to dying strangers without expecting anything in return. We've come to the end of today's story. I hope it touched your heart. Thanks for watching and staying with us till the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?